Hey everyone, this is Isaac. I'm CEO at Trullion, and today on AI Accounting Intelligence, we'll be talking with real people about real things related to AI and the impact on the accounting industry. Stay tuned. All right, hey everyone, this is Isaac Heller from Accounting Intelligence. I'm really excited today to be joined talking with a friend, we'll call it a new friend, Noah Waisberg. Noah, how you doing today?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. Yeah, good to be here. Look, I've enjoyed getting to know you over the past while.
Yeah, so good to see you. Look, you guys are in for a really cool episode today. I know there's going to be a lot of accounting and kind of CPA related material, but interestingly, Noah is a lawyer turned AI entrepreneur, really one of the early pioneers, I would say, with a really successful initial exit, and now onto his, I don't know if it's second or third company. I mean, we'll find out. Okay, very nice. I know some people don't like hearing from the lawyers, but today this could be a really interesting story. My goal, Noah.
Listen, the lawyers like hearing from the accountants just as much as the accountants like hearing from the lawyers, I suspect. So
okay, very nice. So we've got it. We've got a duet today. We've got the AI accounting voice, and I'll do my best to represent it, and the AI legal voice. And I have a feeling we're going to intersect a lot, which is kind of one of the cool parts about this AI journey. And I actually learned about Noah's company earlier when I was in the accounting industry, and accountants started looking at Noah's tool, which had started in the legal tech. But we'll talk a little bit about accounting and AI. We'll talk a little bit about legal AI, how they intersect, and have a lot of fun. But before we get into all that, like Noah, you got to tell us a little bit about the journey, because it's pretty cool. Where are you now, and then how'd you get here?
Yeah, for sure. So I started out as a mergers and acquisitions lawyer at a big New York law firm. I thought a lot of the work that I did and that I supervised was just not done that efficiently and could be done better. So back in 2010, I quit and I sat and I thought, and I started thinking about contract review. And I realized that it sort of fit what I was looking for pretty well, that junior corporate lawyers spent huge amounts of time reviewing contracts, that even at the world's best law firms, they make mistakes at that, but that they're often looking for the same things over and over again. And so I got together with Dr. Alexander Hudek, who has a PhD in computer science from the University of Waterloo, and we set to work. And from talking with Alex and other comp sci PhDs, we thought it would take us 4 months to solve the technical AI issues at that time and get our software really accurate at finding information in contracts. And we thought it would take us like 6 months to raise money. So we're like, let's just build. And we set to building. And instead, like a year later, our software did not work. And like 2 years later, our software did not work. But after about 2.5 years, we got the tech to be pretty good. And then we faced a sort of second problem, which was getting lawyers who are mostly billing by the hour to pay us to use it. And there we kind of kept running into a wall over and over again. Interestingly, one of our ways around this wall was we ended up signing up a big four firm and their audit side who was looking for tech like this around the same time as we started to get some lawyers on. And their support took our software in a slightly different direction, but also like really meant the world to us in terms of getting the business to kind of catch on. Anyways, we kept going. Eventually the lawyers sort of came on. We bootstrapped the company to like 100-ish people, then took in some outside funding in 2018, continued to grow the business. When we sold Kira in 2021, we had 18 of the world's top 25 M&A law firms using our AI to pull data out of contracts. And we also had parts of all the big four, as well as a bunch of companies using us directly. As part of selling that company, we got to do a wild deal, which allowed us to keep a copy of the underlying tech in Kira Systems, the underlying AI and our training data. And we got to keep about 30 of our 180 people. And we spun that into Zuva, which is what I run now. And Zuva is pretty similar to Kira. It's right now, I think over time it'll shift to be different, but it's tech that uses AI to pull data out of contracts, just not for law firms right now.
Amazing, amazing. Sounds very, very familiar, but I'm sure there's all different types of nuances about how you deal with contracts and AI, which we'll get into. I think for those of you on listening in, um, Noah started his career. I think it was Weil Gotshal, which is one of the
Correct.
top law firms in the world. And so you think of the parallels between the accounting and legal industry. It's kind of like getting into a Big Four level law firm, top law firm, and then going on to found Kira. The other thing I remember is Kira, as it was growing, took that funding from Insight Partners, which is one of the top software investors in the world. So it's funny, Noah and I know each other now, but at the time I was working at a company called Visual Lease, when Kira was kind of emerging. And Visual Lease was a lease administration company for real estate, which then ended up getting into the lease accounting industry. But all of the data was entered manually from a contract perspective. So I started to be curious of what are the people out there that are doing these things, and that's when I saw Kira. And so while you were moving from kind of legal to accounting, I was coming from the accounting side or the real estate side into the accounting, and Kier was that intersection point. So I think it's really cool that there was a lot of overlap, that you're able to take like that one legal kind of bend, but then apply it to the accounting profession. But I'm curious about diving deeper. So we've got Big Four accountants or controllers on the line. Take us into maybe a junior corporate lawyer's world as it relates to contract review. And I'm thinking there's two buckets I'm thinking about. One is like that e-discovery of going deep and finding a needle in a haystack. Maybe one is like transactional contract review where you're going through those one by one. I don't know if those are right categories, but give us a sense of what are the different buckets of contract review that these lawyers are experiencing.
So lawyers, as you'd imagine, do lots of types of contract review, but I think there's two big buckets. And the way that I break them down is pre-signature and post-signature, right? So pre-signature is you're trying to think about, should I sign this contract or should my client sign this contract? So I'm going to there feel like reviewing the whole contract and just seeing if there are things in it that I need to have in. For example, my company has a policy that says X, and then things in there that could be harmful for us. Like, for example, we indemnify, we're doing a deal with Philip Morris and we're indemnifying them against all legal expenses related to X or something like that. Like, that might be something where you'd be like, or like instead of Philip Morris, maybe it's, asbestos company or whatever sort of sketchy, harmful thing is out there. That's where, as a lawyer, you're going to be trying to think about what are the risks and how can I avoid them. So that's the pre-signature area. And then the other big bucket, and this is the area where I'm most expert, is post-signature contract review. And in post-signature contract review, you are a company, you're a law firm representing a company, who knows, right? But you got a whole pile of contracts that already exist, right? Like the company has already signed them. Maybe you're doing an M&A deal and you're thinking about buying a company that has these contracts. Maybe you're doing an M&A deal and you're a company and you're selling your contracts and you need to know what's in them before you sell them. Maybe you're a company where a regulatory change has happened or something like that, or you think something sort of sketchy has occurred. Like, for example, non-competes have been banned in employment contracts and you have employment contracts and you feel like going through them. Maybe you're a company who's trying to populate some sort of database, like a lease management database or a contract management database or the like. And you need to go through and you need to find normally a pretty set menu of things that are in those contracts. So for example, if I was doing an M&A deal, I would care about things like the change of control implications of doing this deal, like what happens when you do the deal. I'd be thinking about, but maybe it's a financing, and instead of looking at change of control, I'll be thinking about, are there any restrictions on doing a financing or an IPO or something like that. I'll also be thinking potentially about does this company have what it says it has, right? Like if I was doing an M&A deal and someone was like, we have a 10% of our revenue is with Walmart, I would probably feel like looking at that Walmart contract and just figuring out how Walmart could actually get out of that contract. Like, is it like a sort of hard contract, or is it one where Walmart can terminate for convenience on 60 days notice? And like potentially the former might be more valuable or less valuable, who knows, right? And then a third thing I'm going to be trying to figure out is, do these contracts come along with anything bad if it's an M&A deal, right? So do they have sort of the proverbial hazardous waste dump in the basement? In the case of a contract, that's probably stuff like exclusivity, non-compete, especially maybe most favorite customer pricing, maybe non-solicit, and some of those like indemnification, limitation of liability type issues that I mentioned before. So that's what I'd be looking for if I was doing an M&A deal. If it was more like loading a contract management system, the company's just going to have a list of things that they feel like in there, and you'll pull from that list. But basically, what you tend to be doing with post-signature is pulling out a bunch of pre-identified data and doing something with it afterwards, like putting it somewhere, sending out taking action on it, something like that.
Very interesting. So you guys, yeah, you guys have always lived in the post signature world. There mostly. There's definitely a pre-signature component. I think what I want to figure out, just from your perspective, is like the timelines of AI contract innovation in legal tech versus accounting tech. My thought, even just looking at our journeys together, is that the accounting tech was like a wave much after the legal tech, which would make sense because a lot of times the contract is the center, of the legal world. But I'm thinking of a few things when you're talking, and when I started my career in finance and accounting, the contract was obviously important. First of all, it was always post signature. I think one thing a lot of people can relate to in
Yeah,
the accounting industry is it's always post signature. Unfortunately, I think there's some good teams that
yeah,
ask
yeah, they
their
don't even bother to consult you on it or something.
yeah. There's some good teams out there, salespeople that will ask their controller, ask their CFO, maybe even ask their auditor, hey, before I sign this big deal, like what are the, AOC 606 implications? But I would say for the most part, me and
I,
my accounting buddies live in a post-contract world. Would you say that is the
I
same?
will tell you, like at our business, and I think I'm not trying to like make some recruiting poster for Zuba or something like that, Zuba's finance team, but
Check out Zuva,
uh,
by the way.
yeah, no. I was saying that one of the funny things about this is though I come at contracts from a lawyer's perspective, I've also been running a business since 2011, and I've raised money for a business. I've sold a business, and so there's definitely some things in there that I'm thinking about from a financy perspective, and I think we think about from a finance perspective. The big one obviously is kind of rev rec issues and stuff like that, and
Right. Well,
terminability of contract.
totally. Well, you mentioned RevRec. Ooh, RevRec. Those two big words. When you were talking about, use an example of I think you used a Walmart contract. You were talking about a 60-day cancellation clause, and I came at this. One of the ways I arrived at Trullion was because I had back-to-back career experiences. One involved a lot of RevRec, and then the other involved a lot of leases. So like naturally my world is oriented around this. Well, you got to review a lot of contracts and you got to, figure out how to put them into a database or a journal entry format. It turns out that the software company I was working at, we were a pre-IPO travel tech company, but we were a very complex portfolio. And so the RevRec was just a mess because it was a lot of services and different product lines. There are some industries that don't have as much to do with RevRec, but it felt like hell for me at the time, especially because we had done a lot of M&A. But what's interesting is this idea that when RevRec came in and even leases, the contract just became more important to accountants. So the example of the 60-day cancellation, hopefully all the accountants out there know that like that wipes out RevRec. If you have a 60-day that now wipes out RevRec. So there's a clause that can be quantified. That's brand new. When you talk about leases, your renewal options can be exercised, and those can extend the term of the useful life or however you're accounting for those leases. So those clauses, whereas before they weren't as quantifiable or maybe had nothing to do with revenue afterwards, they matter. And I guess what I'm trying to think about with you is like what the contract in accounting, did it come in because of the regulatory standards? Did it kind of evolve because AI was improving? Like why did all of a sudden the contract become a little bit more interesting in accounting, or was it just inevitable?
I can't answer the accounting side thing. The thing that I will say is the Big Four firm that we were working with in the early days, which was Deloitte, was like pretty on top of this stuff back in 2014. Like they were getting into using AI to review contracts back then, which is I think before all the lease accounting stuff came in. But
Interesting. Okay.
you know a lot of this stuff. Otherwise, I think their idea was that just as part of an audit, you got to review a sample of the audited company's contracts, and that they felt like they could do this faster and better using AI. So it became, I think, part of their audit procedure back like in 2014. So they at least were on top of this for a while. But due to some contractual stuff at Deloitte and the like, we weren't able to get to know too many other accounting firms for
I
a
understand.
while.
Yeah, it's a small market, and of course, everyone's trying to sometimes build internally versus third-party vendors. Maybe back up a little bit. Um, Legal AI and legal tech, and especially contract tech. I mean, you started an AI company in 2010. That's crazy. Like
Love it.
that's
Yeah,
insane.
no, it's pretty cool. It was actually like before I remember writing a blog post on the implications of Watson winning on Jeopardy, right?
Wow.
Like, so
What was
we
the
were doing this before then.
Okay, so just side note, so I started Trullion in 2019, and even then, people were like, "Whoa, that was so early for AI," which we'll get to what ChatGPT has done to everyone. But like
Oh
when you
yes, I
started,
believe I am. In addition to everything else, I think I am the world's first author of a children's book on AI,
wait, that's really cool. Okay,
which I
what's the
think I
book
wrote
called?
back in like
What's the book called?
yeah, for sure. It's Robbie the robot. Is Robbie the robot learns to read? That we gotta redo it. If you got, it's like a board book, so it would only be interesting if you have like super young kids.
Very nice. And wait, you're based in Toronto these days, or where? Okay, okay,
Yeah, Toronto.
okay. So Rob, we got to check out that book.
If you're in
You'll love
Toronto,
it.
hit me up and I can. They're actually kind of hard to find copies now. We need to do some changes and a reprint. But if you're ever around here, hit me up. I'll give you autographed copies.
There we go. So 2010, Kira's getting started. Where was the AI contract tech industry? Because I know there are some big like legal tech. It was new. It was brand new. It was still
You
blazing,
know what?
or
It turns out when we started, we thought there was no one doing anything like we did. And I remember 6 or 8 months in, like one of my worst days in business at the time was realizing that there was someone else who was doing this. So it turned
ouch.
out there were a couple other people who tried to do something like that, who had done something like that. There was another company doing something like that, this company Seal Software that ended up getting bought by DocuSign that was kind of doing it simultaneous to us, more focused on the contract management side of the world. But there was one that kind of came and went, or two that came and went before us, that had some different approaches to what we were doing. I
Interesting.
think one was maybe a bit more pre-sig, and then one was like also contract management focused and quite rules based. Like they built rules to find everything as opposed to our kind of machine learning approach, which also differentiated us from Seal, which was also try to use rules to pull this stuff out. Whereas we were just hard machine learning all the time. That's it.
Interesting. And I want to come back to those approaches. Another question. So you come at it from a legal lawyer lens, applying AI to contracts. One of your early customers you mentioned is Big Four, Deloitte. When you were in the room, those early days in the rooms with these accountants and these audit partners or whoever it was, did you like notice different ways they approached the contracts post signature and their audits versus a lawyer? Like, what was it, two different lenses, or you guys were kind of in the same ballpark?
Um, I think in general, like the way that we were thinking about contracts is like people have a pile of contracts and they're trying to pull data out of them.
Right.
And we know some of the ways that people can pull data out of these contracts, but we don't know everything. And so, in fact, like one of our biggest business sort of unlocks in 2014 was building. So pre 2014, the software could find what we had taught the software to find. And we'd taught it like 15 things. And then I think we got it up to like 28 different data points that it could pull out of contracts. Okay. And that was like, that was it. Okay. Like that's what it could find. And then we're like, but we can teach it more, would be part of our sales pitch, right? Like we go into places and we'd be like, we can teach this more. And places would be like, yeah, sure you can. Like, great, you taught it to someone, like you did it over the course of a weekend for someone, but it just wasn't that great. And in summer 2014, my partner got done this thing that we'd long been trying to do, which was enabling people to teach the software to find whatever they felt like themselves. And so, one part of our sales process at this Big Four and at other places was we would go in there and we'd be like, let's teach the system something new together. And they got to try teaching the software something new, and it worked. And off we went in terms of them adopting us. But the basic way that we had thought about contracts by 2014 was you have things you care about in your contracts. We don't know what the like maybe those are one of the 28 things that we've pre-built out. Maybe they're not. And if they're not, we built technology that enables you to teach it something new. And so that's it. And if you think about software like post-contract, post-execution contracts, that way it kind of doesn't matter what you're reviewing for, right? Like maybe you're reviewing for Brexit relevant provisions, maybe you're reviewing for LIBOR relevant provisions, maybe you're reviewing for RevRec relevant provisions. Like none of those three were things that we had built out, but it didn't matter because we built the tools that enabled people to build more. And in fact, so over time, we ended up expanding our coverage of things that we found pretty significantly. So I think today Zuva can find 1,300 different data points out of the box instead of 28. But our customers between Zuva and Kira have taught the technology to find 20,000 plus additional data points.
That's
So
that's fascinating, and it's crazy to see kind of the exponential growth from 28 to 13 or 20,000 over the years. When I'm thinking about the question about like an audit partner and a lawyer partner like in a room like looking at a contract differently, it sounded like there was a lot of overlap in terms of the types of things they're looking for. I'm sure there's a little bit more of a dollar sign ringing in an audit partner and a little bit more of a risk, red light, yellow light in a lawyer's head. But overall, there's a lot of overlap. And the reason that's interesting is because when you get into these AI models, like they seem to end up going to be very, like, in order to be adopted, they need to actually really deeply serve the end user. And so if it's too far adjacent, even though you're looking at the same thing, it can be totally off. I mean, because lawyers know what they want, audit partners know what they want. It just so happens there was a lot of overlap, which is awesome. And as I think about like how to actually train these models and how it's evolved, I mean, you're probably in the sky in terms of all the evolution of this. But I just want to kind of share for everyone here. I mean, Noah's coming in this period, 2010, 2014, where, correct me if I'm wrong, you mentioned rules and machine learning. You had to train a lot of the models yourself. You had and probably still have your own models. That's correct?
yeah, so we had our own. So we always did machine learning, and what we built was machine learning that was really good at finding words, paragraphs, sentences, data points in contracts. And that was it. We also built some other stuff along the way. Like for example, we built technology that was really good at copying tables into Excel, thanks to this
Interesting. By the way, that accountants
thanks
love
to the
that.
big flow partner. Yeah, no,
Account-
no, no, totally. It's like total. I've heard there's a big company that does that now, and it's like this funny thing where we kind of
totally.
built something along that line back then. But yeah, no, we built our own technology back then, and we continue to use that. Though now we kind of use some of that as well as some commercially available LLM stuff too.
Okay, good. And I want to talk about that because I think that's a really interesting concept. A lot of people, especially like in the past couple of years, your average, AI enthusiast asked, or maybe your recent AI enthusiast, I think a lot of people don't appreciate that a lot of these AI companies coming out today are leveraging the open source, these broad LLMs from whether it's OpenAI or Llama or Anthropic, and they're kind of embedding it in their tool. Whereas in the early days, Noah, it's fair to say you were building like almost like an open AI for legal. It was like your LLM. Is that correct? Like, and now
Yeah, so we didn't we yeah, it wasn't even an LLM, right? Like it was supervised machine
got it.
learning back
Okay,
in the
got it.
day.
Okay, so supervised machine learning. And by the way, you mentioned you're in the Waterloo community. That's one of the top premier, I think, AI research and development ecosystems in the world. Am I not mistaken?
Yeah, we've hired a bunch of people from there over the years. Great school.
There you go. So shout out to the Toronto AI ecosystem. So 10 years ago, you would have had to do a lot of your own supervised machine learning. Today, whether it's right or wrong, a lot of people can start with a little bit of, I won't say a lot, but a little bit of a head start with open source LLMs. Sometimes you have best of breeds for different use cases. I mean, give us a sense of like how it's changed today. One vantage point would be like if you started Kira today, would you have to be doing the same thing, or would you be starting with an open source LLM model and enhancing that? Like, how would it be different if you start an AI company today versus 10 years ago or 15?
Yeah, I think if you started today, you'd definitely be using some of the like we spent 2.5 years trying to get or we trying to get tech to be really accurate at finding these sort of the text classification problem of finding word to sentence to paragraph length text. And today you would have to do some experimentation with LLMs, but you'd probably get to the same place. Interestingly, we've seen numbers on one sort of law firm customer of ours did a sort of thing where they went and they tried to take an LLM and get it to work the sort of same way. And they were able to get it to work at kind of around the same ish level to which we were able to get our tech to work. But the interesting thing about that to me is like, you got 10 years newer underlying technology, and it's still like you're basically getting the same results that we were getting back in 2013.
That's really
Um,
interesting. It's the
More or
old, they
less,
don't,
like our work also improved over time too. So
that's awesome. It's the old, they don't, we're in the AI phase of they don't make them like they used to.
I think there's pretty cool stuff you can do with the new tech. The interesting thing about the new tech is it's just like super inefficient at getting to its answers. So it's like really, really, really cool, but it's like very computationally costly to get there, and financially costly. So the old tech is like because you were possibly relying on less powerful computers or whatever, you built tech that was a lot more efficient. And so one of the interesting things that we're seeing right now is that we can combine some of the stuff that we built once upon a time with LLMs and use it to kind of generate a result, but with a lot less effort and maybe a lot higher reliability.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, so you mentioned like a lot of those original models that you built, with Kira, maybe a decade ago, are being benchmarked against the new models, and they're just as good, and in some cases better, right? Which is kind of an interesting paradigm. Or what were we saying? Yeah.
Well, yeah, though the interesting thing is the new models, we can do some interesting things today that we couldn't do before. So one thing that we can do now that we sort of have struggled with for a really long time using the older tech is we were always really good at finding the relevant section of the contract. Like you'd like to find the pricing section of the contract or the limitation of liability section of the contract or the termination for convenience section of the contract. Our tech, the pre-existing tech was going to be pretty good at finding that part of the contract. But where we couldn't do anything was interpreting that section of the contract. And we had like probably like quite a lot of people working on this in 2018, 2019. And it just, the tech never really got working to the level that we felt like having it go to. And what we figured out with LLMs is that if we layered them on top of our pre-existing models, that we could not only find a termination for convenience clause, but we could also interpret that termination for convenience clause into, say, a structured bucket. So now if you use our tech, it'll not only find you the termination for convenience clause, but it can also group that termination for convenience clause into one of, say, 5 buckets, like contract is not terminable for convenience, contract is terminable for convenience with prior note, like X set amount of prior notice, and whatever the other structured categories are. And that's through a combination of our pre-existing tech, which is sort of reliable, not going to make any hallucinations, and pretty accurate and quite efficient. And then layered on top of that, we've used LLMs to kind of parse the results out into one of those structured answers.
That's so
So I think
interesting.
there's kind of cool things each can do.
Yeah, definitely. And in my head, the way I think about it is like it took so long 10 years ago to get from like, I don't know, 0 to 80%, let's call it. And then now you can, but let's say Kira or Zuva, got to 90% and 92% or whatever it is. Now you could start at 80%. But the challenge is the more people are adopting AI and getting used to AI, they care about not just 80 to 92%, but like 91 to 92. So those 5 use cases you mentioned, as users are getting more sophisticated, they're like, well, wait a minute, you know, Zuva does this, so can't you do this? Like you're starting to compete not just on those 28, fields, but like the nuanced 13,000, and then all the different scenarios. So I'm thinking, you mentioned a few things about like just the advancement in
Though actually, like what I'd say is like,
yeah.
but really, I think like one of the other things as a buyer you should be thinking about in this area is more like the interface, right? Like there are interface things that are really like, because you are getting to like say 92%, right? Probably recall, not necessarily F1, right? So you're getting to say 92% recall, but actually like maybe for some use cases you'd rather be at 85% recall, meaning like you'll have more misses, but you'd rather have less false positives, right? Because for that use case, maybe you're like just happier with that. And then in other use cases, maybe like you really can't have misses. So that 92% recall, which measures the level of misses, is sort of more important to you, as well as perhaps a user interface that's really well set up to help a reviewer get rid of false positives. Or maybe help you do other things like group relevant documents together or assign and review work. One of the things we remember from dealing with the auditors was like they were quite obsessed, like I mentioned, with being able to pull tables out and put them into Excel. They were really obsessed also with being able to like tick and tie numbers back in some sort of workflow. So I think that part of the thing with the systems today is like the tech, you can get to 80% a lot easier, but actually a lot of the hard stuff is number one, getting from 80 to something higher. And then number two, putting the results in some kind of form that's really useful for your end user. And number three, wrapping it in an interface that suits your end user.
Okay, so I think that's super interesting, and like where I'm thinking now is, I'm an accountant on the line, or listening in, or I'm an auditor listening in, and maybe I work at a big company, and they're doing some AI initiatives, right? How are you going to use AI on your team this year in 2025? And we hear it all the time, and I know there's a tendency to build internally. There's these revivals of new tech and accessible tech, and AI is one of those. You mentioned that the cost equation has changed, so it's now much easier and more accessible to be able to deploy LLMs. I'm oversimplifying it, right? You still need a lot of help, but okay, and you're previewing like how you feel about this, which is what I'm trying to get at. Um, you could potentially build something internally with an LM because you say, hey, I could get 80% and I could save money. Then you mentioned like the interface, which by the way is really hard. Like, yeah, you can get a cheap LLM into your, I don't know, big four firm, but do you have a product designer that's like doing a bunch of research on false positives? And are you going to increase your number of errors because you guys built something internally without user experience? I don't know, but you know where I'm going, Noah. Like I'm trying to think today with all this enthusiasm from CIOs and power users who want to build this stuff internally. Like, is there a build versus buy equation, or it's still, look for the next Zuva or Kira out there? What are you thinking? And you could talk about legal and accounting. I'm interested in accounting and audit, and you know how we feel at Trullion. But there's definitely some use cases internally that I've seen that have worked, and then others where you got to look outside your walls.
Yeah, so the way that I think about it is if you can, but I'm kind of biased in this because I've mostly been on the vendor side of these types of questions. But if you can, if there is software that you can buy off the shelf that works for you, I think, and is really well suited to your use case, I think companies are often really well served by using that software. I think some of the advantages are getting that last, like you think you're at 80% and this other thing you can buy maybe is at 90%, and it's you're not going to be that hard to get from 80 to 90. But I think this is like truly an example of the 80/20 rule, that getting that extra distance can be pretty painful, and much more so than I think people anticipate. But then other advantages to kind of I always thought at Kira we had this pretty amazing thing, which was we had most of the world's best law firms using our tech. And so that meant we were getting feedback from all these different law firms and accounting firms and alternative legal service providers and companies. And they were all in tons of different jurisdictions, like in the UK and Canada and the US, like tons in the US, but then also in like India and Australia and Brazil. And they were all seeing sort of like slightly different variations of similar problems. And suggest like a good suggestion from a top UK firm might be something that a US firm would face in like 6 months or a year and they just hadn't faced yet. And because we were getting all this feedback from all these different people, it gave them like back in the day, it gave all our customers, we think, a real advantage of just kind of getting to experience something that a lot of different people were contributing to. The other thing that you kind of get to notice is people notice bugs, right? Like just building software is inherently buggy. There's inherently edge cases. And the more sort of diverse a user base you have, the more you can kind of tease out some of those bugs and weird edge case situations and get pretty good at dealing with them. And as a customer, you might never run into these bugs, but you might also just be like 3 months away from running into these bugs. And if you're dealing with a vendor who has a whole sort of developed set of different users, I think it can really kind of flow pretty well. And then the final thing is the vendor also can just afford at a certain level of scale, maybe not when they're tiny, but as they get bigger, they're getting money from like 50 different people to solve this problem. And so like if you're putting in the same amount of money as like one of those places, or maybe even less than one of those places because you're trying to save money by doing it yourself, and they're getting in money from like 50 of those places or 100 of those places. And obviously money goes into lots of things, like it doesn't just go into development, um it goes into sales and marketing, it goes into SG&A, like, or sorry, general sales is in but like goes into administrative,
P&L,
like it goes
baby.
into,
Oh yeah.
yeah, totally. Like money goes into lots of different stuff at a vendor, but like ultimately, like if I've got 100 customers and you're building specifically for one customer, the level of investment that I'm probably putting in is probably pretty high.
I think,
Um,
yeah. And that's
and
like a huge reminder. And of course, if you're at a big company, you think you have more scale than, a software vendor who's sampling hundreds of different customers. But I think, people need to remember that AI benefits a lot from a community, both on the user experience and then also, of course, from the training. And essentially building internally can resemble an echo chamber, unless it's something like super specific and unique to your company that can be easily deployable. You're missing out on like the benefits of a whole community, right?
yeah, like I think there are situations when it can totally make sense to build
Like what?
internally,
Give
though.
us
Like,
give us a couple, and try to think: is there one in accounting and audit? Like if you're an auditor, or you're an accountant, maybe Big Four or whatever, where you could build internally.
well, I think so. With some of the big four firms specifically, I know that some of them have kind of like their own audit workflow systems, right? Like workbenches. And so, to the
Yeah,
extent you had your own workbench, like question if you could get a vendor who could sell you like an entire workbench, like that might be something that'd be good, but you may not be able to get that vendor, in which case I think some places do have their own that they built out. And at the scale of one of those firms, I think that can make sense. Like they'll sometimes incorporate external technology and it may make sense to incorporate some external components in that. But I think that could make sense. The other spot where I think it can make sense is like if you're dealing with a problem that you have that maybe not too many other people have. Like Isaac, you mentioned at one of your earlier jobs, like before Visual Lease, you were at a travel company, right? And it maybe there are some special quirks to being at a travel company um, that a vendor is just not solving, right? Like there might not be like Expedia owns or whatever, like hotels.com owns every single thing out there. And so there's just not a big enough market where a vendor can kind of benefit from customizing to that market. And in that specific case, like maybe you use an external vendor for some stuff where you can get it to work across the stuff that you have, but for stuff that you do that's special and unique, then that's a really great spot to build yourself. And I think the nice
Interesting.
thing is that today you may be able to get something sort of working with a lot less effort.
That's awesome. Okay. Just maybe last couple questions. Give us
Yeah.
like two or three things that you're excited about as it relates to applying AI. If you can, give us like accounting and audit on one foot, and then definitely legal. But just give us a couple things that you see on the horizon that you're excited about.
Yeah, I think to me, I think it's super exciting that you can start to get structured information out of contracts. I think that the sort of generation stuff that we built the first time was like just helping you take a unstructured contract and turn it into basically semi-structured information. Like here is the termination for convenience clause. Like this contract has a termination for convenience clause. I think a lot of, for what it's worth, a lot of the LLM results today are actually kind of ironically also semi-structured, right? Like if I say to an LLM, like across this pool of contracts, tell me which ones I can terminate for convenience, and they say, well, you can terminate lots of them, or but they say it in a different way each time. Ironically, that's also semi-structured information. But to me, the thing that's really exciting is trying to get the contracts down to more structured information. Because if you can get things into structured information, you could do really interesting stuff with it. Like, for example, trigger an action. Like, if I see this specific form of termination for convenience, then I would like to send it in for further review or something like that. And in fact, or you can drive richer visualizations. You can put things into tables and say, like, I'd like everything that's in group A on category one and group C on category two. And this type of normalized after this normalized date in category three. And if I can combine those three things together, like maybe I can get much richer insights than I could before. Interestingly, it also opens up possibilities on the pre-sig side. So, for example, like now at Zuva, when we sign an NDA to speed things up, we've kind of used our own technology to build like a quick internal NDA sort of review tool, right? Where it just says like, if the NDA has these three attributes, then it's got to go for human review. But if it doesn't have these attributes, we can just sign it. And so I can imagine something just thinking about what you're describing with accounting and how you only get contracts post SIG. Like I could imagine if a company had some sort of automated checker for their leases or for their contracts, and it said like, hey, if it's terminable for convenience, it's got to bump up to a higher level. Like you got to get the CFO's approval or something like that.
Oh, very,
Um,
very interesting. It's like
yeah, because like
signature
you can
matrix.
put
Yeah.
you can put like you can say risk, like you can do risk. If you can break things into categories, you can do risk scoring, right? And if you can do risk scoring, you can do that pre-sig too, right? Like you can do a post-sig. But what we've done for our NDAs is we do them, like we send them through risk scoring software that we built ourselves, just because we're able to get our results into structured form. We use that to say like, if a contract has a risk, then it requires a different level of review, right? But if it's sort of risk free as determined by the software, and there's like a bit of risk in having the software make the determination, but there's also a big plus because you can do it a lot faster, and it might spot something that a person would miss who was being lazy. Um, it's something where we're able to kind of use that structured information to kind of do something we couldn't have done before. So I think
I
I'm
love it.
excited about structured information in contracts.
That's awesome. And those were some inspirational use cases. So just to kind of put a bow on it, like, for those of you out there, I hope it inspired a few entrepreneurs or intrapreneurs, if you're sitting at your big corporate accounting or audit firm. I mean, it was just really cool, Noah, to hear the story that kind of end note of risk scoring, of the kind of the timeline of AI, starting with extracting those, 15 or 20 fields, almost like a binary yes, no, all the way down to this like red, yellow, green, like quantified risk scoring, which I know that the accountant teams really, really appreciate. It's been a really cool journey, and I hope it inspires more. I also just saw in your bio that you wrote a book, AI for Lawyers, which was on the Wall
Oh
Street
yeah,
Journal.
yeah, the Wall
So
Street Journal
we
bestseller
got
on the topic.
we've got two book plugs. I think you should check it. Everyone listening should check out Zuva and Kira, of course, and a little more about Noah's story. And hey, maybe we'll do one of these again next year.
Yeah, this is totally fun. I would happily talk to you again, Isaac.
Okay, awesome, Noah. Thanks for everything. Have a good day.
You too. Thank you.